Okay, well, hello and welcome. I'm Susan Scott in the Information Systems and Innovation Faculty Group in the Department of Management at the London School of Economics and Political Science, the LSE. And I'm chairing today's virtual showcase for the MISQ special issue in Next Generation Information Systems Theory. The idea of a virtual showcase is to give you a preview of the content in the special issue and an opportunity to engage with the authors of the papers and our provocative commentary. Today we have a subset of the authors and the senior editors are here as well. And you can find the presentations for the previous virtual showcase sessions at the email which we put in the chat. And we'll also be posting links to the papers in the chat as well. And you'll be able to have a direct look at those papers to preview them via those links. And we'll make sure that the video of this event is available both on the website and later via YouTube. So it's going to be my great pleasure to introduce you to the authors as we go through the session today and the senior editors. And then after the presentations, Andrew Burton-Jones, who became editor-in-chief of MISQ while we were working on the special issue, yet another exciting development, is going to share some of his reflections and thoughts on the way ahead for theory and MISQ as a journal that plays such a defining role in the IS field. So if I may, I'm just going to talk just to introduce the special issue for a few minutes, just to share with you the inspiration behind it, which was the observation. Let me share my screen here. Yeah. Which was the observation that there's new technologies, there's new sources of data, there's new critical issues and new challenges. And in the past 10 years, a wide variety of developments in information systems, information technology, and data have emerged. And this has led to lots of discussion in the information systems research community in an effort to understand what our response should be and how to action it. And part of the title of our editorial is indeed a call to action. What's our responsibility as IS scholars? And can we define a leading role in these discussions, in these discourses, in these developments? And of course, one response was that, hey, we need new theory. And this was the primary prompt for the previous editor-in-chief of MISQ, Arun Rai, to ask first Andrew Burton-Jones and then recruit Brian Butler and Xuanxing Zhu and myself to work on this special issue to explore how new theory might give us new ways of thinking about the new phenomena. And it was Arun who encouraged us to write a call for the special issue. And at the same time, as we were doing the work of the special issue, reviewing the papers and having discussions amongst the editors, workshopping ideas with the authors, it became clear that the notion of IS needing new theory was itself something that authors wanted to talk about. Do we need new theory? Or is it that we need new ways of theorizing? Do we need to revisit old theories and dig deeper into them to develop them? Do we need to look at new methods? Do we need to engage with new people beyond the boundaries of IS? And maybe we don't need new theory at all. So I think it's fair to say that we experienced a wide range of views and we surfaced lots of different strongly felt positions on this. And so we came to the conclusion that a singular banner headline, IS needs new theory, didn't communicate the intellectual journey that we were on. So our response to that was to reflect on this in the editorial and to put together an invited set of commentaries. And in those parts of the special issue, we've tried to explore, support, and advance an open-minded discussion of multiple positions on this point. Working on the special issue for me was to experience a process in which sincere curiosity and respect were shown, and I hope felt, by all those that we engaged with at every stage. And let me share a little bit about the stages that we went through. In April 2018, the team put together the call for abstracts and papers. In that call, we laid out a set of specific criteria that we hoped to be the hallmark of the papers that we published, that they would motivate, that they would connect with those current developments and concerns, that they would create a new theoretical toolbox, new analytical vocabulary that scholars could use in further research, and mobilize, that it was a call to action. It would inspire researchers that perhaps had been doing the same methods, approach, asking the same questions, writing their papers in the same way for a long time, to consider, to reflect that they might do things differently going forward. We received, as you can see here, 170 extended abstracts in November 2018, with many different interpretations of the call and its criteria. We provided feedback to the authors, and subsequently in the spring of 2019, 60 full papers were submitted. We worked with a really, truly great set of associate editors and reviewers to provide feedback for everyone that submitted, with the aim of enacting what I feel has been under Arun Ray and going forward with Andrew, MISQ's mission for being an author-centered journal. And we hope that even if papers didn't make it into the special issue, that we've supported a wave of nascent publications that would hopefully appear either in this special issue, or if the timeline or the criteria didn't resonate, then we wanted authors to experience the kind of support that meant they could take their work forward through other IS outlets. So the next step with this special issue was to invite 11 authors to a workshop, which was kindly organized and supported by the University of Maryland in August 2019. And we all traveled there in person, imagine that, and shared a room together. This helped develop the contributions of the particular papers that were there, and I think also advanced our sense of what the larger message of the special issue would become. The following year, we received final versions of the 5 papers, having worked developmentally with them through multiple revisions. And we reached out to authors for invited short papers that were brought together as a provocative commentary. It's a way of honoring that spirit of curiosity and respect that we worked with throughout the special issue. Now, the work of a special issue involves a large number of people, and on this slide, we really want to recognize all those with whom we worked to make the special issue happen. I can't speak highly enough of my fellow senior authors, Andrew Burton-Jones, Sean Zinzou, and Brian Butler. Together, we formed a global team working across time zones as well as traditions of information systems research, and concluding our work on the special issue during the intense year of 2020. And I think Sean and Brian would join me in thanking Andrew, not only for his work, for working with Arun Rai on bringing the original inspiration for that special issue to a reality, but also for his steadfast intellectual leadership of this special issue and management of the process, which was extraordinary, by which the whole thing happened when all of us came under so much intense pressure during the pandemic. So thank you to everybody who's named here for the effort that they gave, giving authors feedback, helping them develop their papers. And it really is the quality of this kind of effort that makes MISQ, I think, unique among other journals. So thank you, everyone here, for all the hard work that you put into making the special issue what it has become. And thanks to Erin Ray and to Jan de Groos, who continues even after her retirement to help us to get this special issue through to the process of publication. We're very thankful for you, Jan. So to move on with the session today, we have 5 papers in the special issue. And in this third session, you'll hear from the authors of 2 of them, Ping Wang, Amber Young, who will present on behalf of Jerry Kane, Anne Marshak, and Sam Ransbottom. So I'm going to ask Ping, I'll stop sharing now, Ping. And if,
okay.
Yeah, thanks. And while you're setting up, let me just mention that we will be using the Q&A function on Zoom today. So just in terms of practicalities, we have 256 people with us today. And so in the chat function, you'll find links and so on. Please use the Q&A function. For those of you who haven't used it yet, look down at the bottom of your screen where you would use the chat function, and you'll see a Q&A tab or button. As you listen to the papers and provocations, please do post questions for the authors there. They'll respond to you. Co-authors maybe during the session, but for the most part after they have presented. And it's a chance to really engage more closely with the authors, and with so many attendees, this is how you can ensure you get an opportunity to directly ask your question. Yeah, and so I would like to invite, it's my great pleasure to invite Ping Wang to present Connecting the Parts with the Whole towards an Information Ecology Theory of Digital Innovation Ecosystems. Thank you, Ping.
Thank you, Susan. Can you see my screen okay? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you and your families are doing increasingly better as the world makes progress to control and end this pandemic. My name is Ping Wang. I'm a faculty member at University of Maryland's Information School. For over 20 years, I have studied popular innovations in the IT field, such as enterprise resource planning, ERP, customer relationship management, CRM, cloud computing, and big data. As the popularity of each specific innovation rises and then falls, innovation as a key phenomenon is always popular in our field. So you may argue whether our field is obsessed with theory, but there is no doubt that our field is obsessed with innovation, and that's a great thing. Every 10 years or so, we see a major advancement of innovation research in IS. As you can see from the titles of these seminal papers, over the years, the practice and research on innovation have evolved. From IS innovation, mainly led by the internal IS department in a company, to IT innovation championed by technology vendors and consultants, to digital innovations involving a broad set of individual and organizational actors, such as app developers, service partners, accessory providers, interacting, collaborating, competing in digital innovation ecosystems. So digital technologies make it possible to innovate in ecosystems because they break monolithic, vertically integrated product architecture into layered modules. So different modules can be made by different players. It is also desirable to innovate in ecosystem because digital technologies are relatively inexpensive and scalable for the division of labor. Sometimes it is even necessary to innovate in ecosystems because of Joyce's law. Most of the bright people don't work for you. You cannot find all the required talents and capabilities in one single company. So the possibility, desirability, and the necessity of innovating in ecosystems explain why many companies are creating or joining ecosystems. So we see the increasing number of articles about ecosystems in IS and our neighboring fields. By now, we may appreciate the effectiveness of digital technologies in enabling the division of labor in innovation ecosystems. So we may want to make digital technologies even more effective, so more creative and resourceful actors can join, develop successful innovations and sustain the ecosystem. But here is a catch. The more parties join an ecosystem, they also bring more complexity, interdependency, and risk. And this may cause an ecosystem to collapse and fail. My review of the ecosystem literature shows that there is much research on the division of labor, but not enough on the integration of efforts. And this imbalance is due to our focus on the parts of an ecosystem, but not enough on the ecosystem as a whole. So to fill in this gap, I raised this overall research question about the integration of efforts in ecosystems and the role of digital technologies in this integration. Ecosystems are ecological, so naturally I turn to ecology for insights and inspirations. I found that ecologists have studied part-whole relations extensively, and in particular, the concept of Holon was especially helpful. Hungarian-British writer Arthur Koestler coined the term Holon to refer to an entity in a hierarchy showing the characteristics of a part and characteristics of a whole at the same time. Applying the Holon concept to the innovation ecosystem, each player is both an autonomous actor and a member of the ecosystem. Each ecosystem is both a whole system and a part of a broader ecosystem at a higher level, as shown here in this diagram. We have many different types of ecosystems: product ecosystem, service ecosystem, business ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystems, market category ecosystems. And lower level ecosystem constitute higher level ecosystem. The ecology lens help us review and structure the part-whole relations, but does not address the complexity, interdependency, and uncertainty that come with multiple parties. To reduce the complexity and interdependency, players in the ecosystem need information as they interact with each other and perform innovation tasks. So what kind of information is relevant to what kind of interactions or tasks? For example, product architecture as information in the representation view may help players combine their offerings into a product for a customer, product package for the customers to buy. Technology standards as information in the adaptation view may guide developers in producing compatible and interoperable mobile apps. So ecosystem participants' local innovations are integrated into an innovation at the ecosystem level. Meanwhile, the innovations may help the players and the ecosystem realize some value from the innovations and achieve some performances at both levels. Based on the performance, the players may make necessary adjustments, adaptations in the next round of innovation in order to increase the value realized and performance achieved. The innovation and performance at the ecosystem level may moderate the innovation activities for the players. And the innovation tasks and activities may repeat and evolve at both levels in the ecosystem over time. And don't forget, ecosystems interact with each other as well. So when the ecology lens and the information lens are combined, we can see the innovation tasks and activities scale up or down to different levels. So in summary, the information ecology theory posits that digital technologies serve a few key functions to provide the information needed in the interactions and tasks for innovation. This theory may help advance the digital innovation research in 3 directions. First, by shifting the focus from the parts to the part-whole relations, we can take care of both the division of labor and the integration of efforts, so we can resolve the paradox mentioned earlier. Second, new research can discover new functions of digital technologies to support or drive new innovation interactions and tasks. And third, we can conduct multi-level research to understand the interactions within and across ecosystems at various levels. For IS research more broadly, as Lucas and Borodi speculated nearly 30 years ago, they said the organization of the future may not be an organization at all. So ecosystems are the organization of the future. They are the next generation organizational form. This theory reminds us that ecosystems need information to exist and thrive. IS researchers can develop next generation IS for the ecosystems. That's all for now. I want to thank the special issues editors and reviewers, colleagues, friends, conference reviewers, seminar attendees for offering valuable feedback. If I cannot respond to your question during this session, please forgive me. Please send me an email by scanning this QR code, and I'll be sure to reply right after this event. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ping. And if we were in person, you would hear 267 people giving you a loud and warm round of applause for your paper today. So, thank you so much, and please imagine the clapping ringing in your ears right now. Thank you. So I'll ask Ping to step out and not share your screen. That's perfect. Okay. Thank you. Trying to find the language. And move to the Q&A to answer your questions, and introduce Amber Young, who's going to be presenting our next paper. Having talked about, in Ping's paper, an organizational form that may pattern the future, and the complex relationships between the whole and the part that may shape the, may be constitutive of the trajectory of that future. We're now going to move to a paper that deals with the question of the future as its core concern, and how to avoid an oppressive future of machine learning. So Amber, we're excited to hear your paper. Thank you so much for presenting it today.
Thank you, Susan. So again, I'm Amber Young, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas at the Walton College of Business. And I am so excited to be here today to share with you some details about our design theory for a new class of AI technologies that we refer to as emancipatory assistants. Now, this is a launch event for next generation theories, so I assume we're all interested in the next generation and looking to the future. But as we look to the future, oh, I've got my video in front of the arrow, just a second. As we look to the future, it's easy to imagine a dystopian future, especially as it pertains to machine learning. So we don't have to look far to see some red flags. Zuboff has a book where she talks about how corporations are using machine learning in oppressive ways and talks about surveillance capitalism. And some scholars have even warned that if we're not careful, we could end up in a future where instead of people controlling technology, technology is controlling people. So we think it's useful as we look to the future to imagine a worst case scenario of what could go wrong in order to avoid an oppressive future. And we were inspired by this concept of Oceania in the book 1984. So we develop a concept Infomania. And this is a possible future, a dystopian state where ubiquitous data collection feeds machine learning systems that people don't understand and they can't modify directly. And in this future, internet-based platforms control the lives of individuals. And these Infomania systems then optimize on outcomes for the collective without regard to the humanity of individual users. And this isn't just a sci-fi fantasy that we're talking about. You know, there are plausible paths to this future. It could arise through government efforts or corporate efforts. And we can even envision a scenario where technologies become autonomous enough that humans lose control of the Infomania systems. So why do we need to think about Infomania and how is this concept useful? First reason is that we can't really address a potential problem until we really nail down what that problem is. And understanding what we want to avoid helps us know what we need to design against and what we need to design for, because we really believe that it's not too late to change this current oppressive trajectory of machine learning adoption. So conceptualizing Infomania really gives us a more concrete idea of a potential future. So it helps us as we were writing to balance triviality against sensational speculation in our examples and in our theorizing. So as I said, we believe it's not too late to change the current trajectory. And that's because we believe there's potential for emancipatory IS solutions to come in and alter this course. So what is emancipatory IS? This term emancipation comes from critical theory, critical social theory, and it relates to this idea, emancipation, that there is a theoretical state where power dynamics are neutralized or balanced in a way that no particular group is dominated or marginalized. So in Infomania, we envision an imbalance of power where whoever or whatever controls these Infomania systems is really controlling the people who are in the system. So we believe that by building on the rich history of critical research in the field of IS, we can design emancipatory IS solutions. Now that said, critical theory research has traditionally talked about implementation of code-based systems. So we do think there's some radical rethinking that needs to be done in this age of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So let me go ahead and describe what I mean by machine learning. This is a class of AI technologies, and we are just talking about, a basic model of machine learning where the inputs are clear and these inputs are weighted in some way as algorithms and neural networks shape outcomes, which then inform a feedback loop of input data. So in our paper, we make this bold claim that machine learning systems can be inherently oppressive. So these are not just tools of oppression that are used by managers. And we base this claim on 4 features of machine learning systems that we believe have an oppressiveness embedded in them. So the first is that machine learning systems optimize outcomes for large samples at the expense of individuals. And that sounds like an Infomania situation, right? And the second is that data inputs face backward, limiting future possibilities. And a backward-facing orientation is going to naturally enforce the status quo that already exists, which is an indicator of oppression in the critical theory literature. The third is that obscure parameters and model weights make it difficult for people to understand these machine learning systems. So again, a system where people don't understand what's going on, that sounds like Infomania. And then finally, specialists train and update machine learning systems with limited feedback from users. So that means people don't control the system directly. They can only make changes indirectly through perhaps manipulation of input data. So what is the solution then? We don't want to get rid of machine learning because it's super useful, and we don't want to control it completely because then we lose out on the potential that this new technology offers. And really, it's not entirely clear that even if there is a group of people that wants to control the development of machine learning tools, that that's completely possible at this point, right? There's already a lot of momentum there. So building on the unique strengths of our field as information systems researchers, we develop a design theory, and we provide normative prescriptions for what should be done through design and how. So we rely on a kernel theory to think about what could be. And most design theories rely on kernel theories from management or psychology because they are interested in that sort of outcome, but we're really interested in how to affect change at the societal level. So we draw on a critical social theory, and this critical social theory can tell us how to achieve gradients of human emancipation in a society. So our kernel theory is Paulo Freire's theory of emancipatory pedagogy. And this critical theory uses a banking metaphor to explain how traditional approaches to learning involve those who are in power depositing knowledge into the brains of those without power. And so we think of Infomania as creating an oppressive information environment that controls what information is deposited into people's brains, and then people can't navigate this oppressive information environment effectively alone. And we need assistance. So that's where we came up with the idea of emancipatory assistance. This is like a virtual assistant to help people emancipate themselves from an oppressive information environment. And we see that emancipatory design, even if they're not calling it that, is starting to take off in industry. So here's an example. Ad nauseam is an application that users can use to, they market it as helping people fight back against digital surveillance to disrupt pervasive bulk data agendas. And the way that they do that is it basically simulates a click on every ad for every user. So it looks like everyone was interested in every ad, and it just overwhelms the system, the models, with all this random data. So they don't have meaningful data. So we propose a machine learning tool be used to create an emancipatory assistant. But if the basic machine learning model is inherently oppressive, then how can machine learning tools be used for emancipation? That's probably what you're wondering, right? Well, this is where Freire's theory comes in. Freire described how oppressive characteristics can be converted to emancipatory characteristics in societies where emancipatory pedagogy processes are used. So there are 5 themes in emancipatory processes that are successful, that have really had a good effect and led to emancipatory outcomes. So we go into more detail about these 5 themes in our paper, and I really hope that you guys will go read the paper because I can't do it justice in a quick presentation. There's so much more information in the paper. But kind of the basic idea here is that we were guided by these 5 themes to design 4 modifications to the basic machine learning model. So here are the 4 modifications. We say that an EA should collect primary data to optimize for individual emancipatory outcomes. The EA should add or discard data sets to avoid a backward-facing orientation. The EA should codify or decodify or informate to overcome the fundamental opacity of model weights. And then finally, the EA should balance authority and freedom in its feedback mechanisms. So taken together, these 4 modifications then inform our design principles for the emancipatory assistance. So that was the theory and background information you need to see where we came up with the design principles. And now I'll talk about each of our 4 design principles. So our first tells us that we should design these EA for richness of preferences, and we have sub-principles for each design principle. So again, I really hope you'll go to the paper because there's so much more information than I can present. But just the idea here is that the EA will work for the individual to promote outcomes that are emancipatory for that person. So for example, an EA could help the individual establish patterns of behavior that they want to have and that are beneficial to them. So one example would be, and we see a little bit of this starting to come to be, like imagine it telling you that based on the alarm clock that you set, now is a good time to go to bed. Based on your physical activity lately, you're ready to have a new physical fitness goal, that sort of thing. Design principle 2 is that the EA should be designed to recognize and resolve conflict between the individual user and the Infomedia platforms. So for example, the EA could do privacy checkups just to make sure that the user's current privacy preferences are being considered regardless of what their past preferences are. And could also do things like blocking platforms who violate their privacy preferences. So whenever, also this is another thing they could do, when the power holder creates conflict for multiple users, so there's a lot of different individuals and they each have their own EA, then the EA could facilitate coordination, things like boycotting. So a similar idea exists in practice. Apps like Boycott help users boycott retailers that they have a conflict of values with. So we see that there's starting to be this idea of designing technology for social good and some pushback, but we're proposing a more radical solution. So the design principle 3 is that the EA should be designed for personalized storytelling. So this means that the EA will help the user to share or withhold data or information as it suits their individual purposes and as it helps the individual to have more control over their own data and their own identity narrative. So there are some efforts to allow users to share certain information in some contexts, but not others, already on social media. So for example, on Facebook, you could have the option to show posts to different groups like acquaintances versus friends or close friends. But of course, platforms aren't always going to cooperate, right? They don't have that incentive. And when Infomedia lacks the incentive to respect individuals' wishes about how their data is used or how they're represented, that's where the EA can step in to strategically share or obscure certain data. And our final design principle says the EA should be designed to educate about alternative perspectives. So it should be able to do things like detect echo chambers and bubbles, filter bubbles, and burst those bubbles and provide access to diverse perspectives. And again, social media platforms obviously understand that there's a problem. They recognize that, and they have taken some steps. We start to see warnings when an article is outdated, some fact checking. It may tell you, don't click on this link because they're going to misuse your data, things like that. But we want to see an EA that protects the individual and then empowers the individual, not the platform, to decide what is data misuse, what is oppressive to me. And we want the EA to be proactive, not just reactive to oppression. So that means we want an EA to do things like preemptively provide diverse perspectives and diverse information, and to help the user recognize oppression and know what to be on the lookout for. So that is our design for this new EA, Emancipatory Assistant Technology, that we believe is needed to help us alter the course of machine learning off of an oppressive track. So we realize that this theory probably raises a lot more questions than it answers, and that's fine. Our goal is not to have an end to a conversation, but for this to be the beginning. So everything I've talked to you up to this point relates to things that can be done now to prevent this future, but more is going to be needed long-term. We're going to need certification bodies and training for users and developers, audit committees, things like that to make sure that emancipatory outcomes come to be. So just to sum this up a bit, I want to talk about some of the key takeaways of this research. So we want to emphasize that right now, machine learning systems are not being designed to optimize for human well-being. And if that's not what they're designed for, they're going to do something different than that and contrary to that. We also note this idea from the Swiss philosopher Paracelsus that it's the dose that makes the poison. So this is the idea that things like common edibles like water, acetaminophen, or caffeine that are good, fine, or even beneficial in small doses can actually be toxic in large doses. And this idea kind of applies to ML because there are smaller examples of oppression that we could mention today. But if we take some current day example like algorithmic job matching, and then we extrapolate that to an Infomania setting where all of the jobs are matched by the platform and Infomania decides early in your education what kind of job you're going to have, or even early in the onset of your life, what direction your life is going to take, then that certainly sounds oppressive. So we need to be careful not to be the frog in the pot of water that starts boiling and we don't even feel it getting hotter. And then I also wanted to mention that we are offering something different because in the past it's been common to say, well, maybe we should directly resist, or we should completely regulate, or we should boycott the use of machine learning systems. And that's a common strategy, but that's not what we're offering. We're saying that we have a blueprint for a system that can interact between humans and machine learning platforms to protect the individual user. And we have this design as an adversarial system, but unlike some adversarial AI that are designed to engage in aggressive attacks, our system is more like a generative adversarial network, a GAN system, where there's a lot of iteration, more like iron sharpens iron, and they kind of collaborate and negotiate to create more optimal outcomes for everyone involved. And finally, I just want to mention that if we want to see more emancipatory IS design, we're going to have to change the culture of organizations and change the culture of development. And customers and users are really going to have to demand that platforms do this and say, we're going to boycott platforms that won't be compatible with an EA, that sort of thing. It won't just come by chance. We have to fight for it, but we do believe there is room in the market for this. We see companies like Firefox has branded itself as a company that cares about privacy. And so we believe there is room in the market for a social media platform and news sites that brand themselves as emancipatory. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions, or we'll move on to the next, whatever time it is.
Thank you so much, Amber. And there's a just wonderful piece. And again, if we were in person, you would hear you know, over 250 hands clapping right now. So, you know, thank you so much for a great presentation. Thank you to your co-authors, Jerry Kane and Marshak and Sam Ransbotham. Thank you so much. There's a couple of things I want to pick up on in your paper, which I thoroughly enjoyed engaging with over the last few years. And the one is this very important point that you made, that you know, when we were starting out our PhD, we may delude ourselves that we're going to make a definitive statement about a research challenge. But as I think we mature as researchers, we realize that we're actually joining a conversation, and in your case, sparking a conversation. And I think that's, I just wanted to make a comment really, that I think that's a really important characteristic of the papers that I think we all ought to encourage going forward, because you know, of course we don't want rough edges, but I think what your paper does for me is inspire me to engage with you to further the conversation. So thank you for setting that up for others. That as papers, as editors, I think we don't want it to be a full stop at the end, a period at the end. We want others to be mobilized to take the work forward. And I really think yours achieves that in a really interesting way. And then a question, which you have at the end of your paper, where you say, so many papers conclude with the sort of short-term implications, how to increase productivity, how to do things differently in the near term. But you call on authors to consider including a more speculative, longer term. And you have many experienced editors on your paper. And I wondered if yourself, Amber, or if one of your co-authors would like to speak to how that might look in publications going forward.
Sure, I can address that. Is our hope is that in the discussion section, people will talk about as the implications play through over time. So that, for example, if a new technology, let's say blockchain, say it was a paper about blockchain, instead of just saying, well, I mean, an important part of that paper might be how blockchain has affected organizational change or has affected outcomes, new product development. But it would also be useful given to gain the knowledge, to share the knowledge that the authors have gained about what they anticipate will happen as the blockchain is being utilized in a larger percentage of firms. So I can envision a paragraph where the speculation is to say that in the short run, let's say this intervention or this innovation had this impact. It can be overused, and we need to make sure we understand, we study those kinds of situations, and that we encourage authors to go back to sites that they've used previously over a longer period of time, and then they can revisit those sites, even though they've published the first part of the first year, but maybe going back to a site they might have looked at over time.
Thank you so much. And would any of your other co-authors like to comment or share thoughts in closing?
Jerry looks like he's typing.
Oh, great. Yeah, great.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I was responding to one of the questions online. We have this discussion within our own author team. Is how big to think, how far in the future to think, how crazy was too crazy. And we hope we got a nice middle ground between being provocative and stirring up conversation without being so far out there that people dismiss us. And I think as a field, what we would push people, I think as a field, we tend to play it perhaps a little too safe and encouraging to push people out a little more into future speculation of what this means. So we don't let, AMJ get theories about AI and machine learning that don't really take into consideration sort of the depth of the IS research that we have done on these topics. So just encouraging authors to be a little more bold, at least in one paragraph of their theorizing or two, as they sort of seek to do this future theorizing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those interesting reflections, and look forward to reading some of your answers in the Q&A. Thank you so much, Amber, for a great presentation, and to all the authors for being here today. I'd like to pick up on this notion of mobilizing others and inspiring others, of getting others to join the conversation. And I mentioned that we have a provocative commentary as part of the special issue. And there's a really nice connection between this paper, the paper that Amber has just so vividly presented, and one of our invited provocations by Dirk Hoekever and Sandra Peter, speculatively engaging in futures for thesis. So I would warmly encourage you to engage with the provocations as well as the papers. I said at the beginning that there was such a range of views that we were keen to invite the voices of others so that you didn't need to take our word for it. And this is what we have with the provocations. We're extremely pleased with how they have how they've turned out. And it's my, of course, huge pleasure to invite Michael Barrett and Wanda Olakowski to present the first provocation for this session, which is Scale Matters, doing practice-based studies of contemporary digital phenomena. And Michael, while I sign off, I'll let you set up your slides. For so many practice researchers, we are in the midst of an ongoing conversation. There's so many challenges, particularly during lockdown, particularly when the phenomena that are emerging are at scale. And this is the topic that Michael and Wanda engage with. So Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. It's a great pleasure to be delivering this joint presentation with Wanda Olakowski, who on our very recent MISQ provocation, which is titled, as Susan said, Scale Matters, doing practice-based studies of contemporary digital phenomena. A big thank you up front, in case we forget, to the special issue editors, Susan, Andrew, Sean, and Brian, for first of all developing this really wonderful and creative next generation theory issue, and also working with us over multiple rounds to try to, in a short space of time, get some ideas as a very starting point about some of the themes and issues that we think are very important for practice-based scholarship. So just to just kick off, the motivation for us, really, both Wanda and I have been reflecting on this, the nature and type of practice-based studies. And indeed, we've worked together on other practice-based research of what we might refer to as classic workplace studies. So in this slide, it's actually from an older paper that we've published, which shows a hospital dispensary, which was giving out drugs manually to patients. And the point of this particular study was to focus on the introduction of robotic innovations. And so a picking robot, which was placed on the right-hand side of the diagram there. And we looked at the implications for workplace studies or boundaries, I should say, between technicians, pharmacists, and assistants, and indeed looked at how we might utilize and contribute back to practice theory. Now, one of the things that we are all very clear on, and it was nicely brought up by Amber, was the way in which contemporary digital phenomena are large scale, include machine learning, big data, sensors, all that you can see there, and indeed span multiple organizations in different countries typically. And so we have actually in our research as well, increasingly seen and looked at phenomena, for example, looking at investigating the development and ongoing transformation of mobile money across the UK, Kenya, Tanzania, Afghanistan, and South Africa, so different countries. So the idea of how we ensure that we adapt and develop for the future our practice-based scholarship in very practical ways was what became, if you like, the motivation for our provocation. And we open up the paper with a vignette, and this is sort of the first half of it. From our history, as I've mentioned, our lived experience, as well as conversations with a number of practice scholars, the whole importance of scale and how we account for it better as practice scholars became a key and primary motivation for our provocation. So as we see in this quote here, often we're feeling increasingly challenged. What's our conceptual toolbox like? Is it enough what we've been doing in the past, which might have been more skewed towards classic workplace studies? How can I further attend to scale in practice-based studies? And that's the really the provocation then. There's the, why scale matters in practice-based research. And we pull out in the paper 2 key questions and related questions. Why and how does scale matter in practice? And how should we as practice scholars conceptualize and examine scale in our research? Well, I think to do that, our starting point is to really think about how do we conceptualize scale. And indeed, we start off by sort of looking at more traditional views of scale, which we use the term at scale, at different scales, if you like. And it's really a focus there on different categories of analysis in how we study phenomena at different levels, whether it's regional, national, global, perhaps cutting across different spatial boundaries. And the underlying assumptions of this conceptualization of scale tends to be one of more uniform and stable patterning to how the phenomena to scale. And so lastly, the other sort of characteristic of characterizing or conceptualizing scale for the at scale approach would be to note that it may be often seen, the phenomenon, as a given, as independent, as being out there, if you like. And indeed, the types of approaches which have been very successful, classic techniques, have used surveys, simulations, trace analyses to look at and build models and theories to explain the phenomena that are scaling by aggregating and abstracting, if you like, from specific conditions and experiences on the ground. And so in trying to say, well, how do we complement and look at that? We sort of use the metaphor of the width scale. And we are drawing quite heavily for inspiration from the geographers who have, over the last couple of decades, been looking at this issue of scale in how we build ideas from a practice perspective. I guess first thing to note is, that it's not viewed as being out there as an independent, but very much how do we experience scale in a particular context, and having a more dynamic view of it. How do we enact with scale through lived experience versus, say, trying to apprehend it through a set of levels which are aggregated and abstracted from experiences on the ground. So we therefore move in our provocation piece to suggest in the paper that we've got 4 key premises for how we can look at scale and why it matters. We've collapsed, just for this short presentation, the first 2 into one. So we're going to just talk through briefly 3 key premises. Scale is enacted in ongoing sociomaterial practice. Scale is performed through multiple practices in and over time and place, and seeing scale as a contested, consequential achievement. So let's talk about it and sort of animate, perhaps illustrate some of these key premises with something which we're all very, very familiar with from a lived experience and are continuing to live through it, the COVID-19 pandemic. How might we, using those premises, seek to understand in hindsight how we understand the scale and spread of this phenomenon? So to start with, taking the first premise, scale is enacted in ongoing sociomaterial practice. Well, I'm going to draw on the UK example, knowing that it is, as I just said, different in different countries. But certainly in the first initial months of the pandemic, the focus of this scale in understanding it was really through a sociomaterial practice of data modeling, which is indeed the case in many countries. What we see over time is that this is followed by an introduction of a set of practices, social distancing, lockdowns, which we're now, and I'm currently experiencing from my home office, and quarantining and self-isolation, which I experience, as many of you might 4 weeks in a row, traveling from UK to Canada over the Christmas. And indeed, we more recently, in the last 5 months or so, we've seen the rollout and implementation of track and trace applications. Again, socio-material practice to help try and stem the spread and scale of the pandemic phenomenon. And now the headlines over the last couple of months, and we are so hopeful that the vaccine distribution as another practice, which sits alongside the data modeling, and every evening we get if you like, a little bit of a dose from BBC News, which analyzes and commentates, drawing on vaccine distribution and data modeling together to understand the scale of the pandemic. So the second, the second premise on scale, that it's performed through multiple practices in and over time and place. We've seen over the last year a number of practices being enacted over time and in different countries. Take, for example, Israel was very quick to lock down as they're culturally used to moving swiftly from normality to crisis mode. Taiwan's historical and lived experience of SARS virus in the early 2000s influenced the very early and quick and swift lockdown practice for which they were praised. And indeed in China and South Korea, using indeed different sets of practices around modeling, contact tracing, and lockdown strategies, they've been able to address the scale and spread of the COVID phenomena. So then on to our third premise, which highlights the importance of looking at scale as a contested, consequential achievement. And so we move over to the US for this vignette story, where the now quite famous Rebecca Jones in Florida. It provides a very vivid example of this premise in action. Rebecca, for those that aren't familiar, is a data scientist who was modeling the scale of the COVID phenomena in the Sunshine State of Florida. And in May 2020, rather abruptly, Rebecca claims that she was fired because she refused to comply with orders to manipulate the data as she saw it to justify the state's ambitious reopening plans. And what she did was she subsequently, in parallel, then went and set up her own data portal to track COVID-19 cases, which contrasted starkly and openly for the world to see the official statistics. Eventually, she was arrested and on charges that she had stolen data. That, the fact that she had used data and resources from the state government inappropriately because she was no longer an employee. So it is a sad but wonderful example of what we refer to as the politicization of scaling strategies, which demonstrates that scale is a contested, consequential achievement. Now, I just want to highlight that it's not just the US, in the UK here as well, and maybe not as extreme, but we have had a lot of contestation between the scientists and the politicians, which really are the public question, the science-led policies that are touted by the government and indeed have had important consequences for the scale of the pandemic. So I want to then bring out more recently the whole idea of vaccine distribution. And vaccine distribution, which is ongoing. This very recent article in The Guardian, which is a newspaper in the UK, highlights, and makes us question, reflect, are richer countries taking more vaccines than needed at the expense of access for poorer developing countries? So indeed, the idea that the scale of the pandemic depends on these distribution of vaccine practices. Making less vaccines available to larger populations of developing countries has consequences for us all, regardless, and especially therefore regarding the scale of the pandemic. So in short, politics and power are woven into the inclusions and exclusions in socio-material practices across time and place. So to conclude or to close, I want to just ask the question which follows on from our opening vignette. Should we as practice researchers relinquish responsibility to address scale and to other approaches which seem more obviously suited? And we very strongly believe that actually it's a moral responsibility, if not a relational responsibility, as practice researchers to complement these traditional approaches to scale of contemporary large-scale phenomena. So we just want to leave you as we close with the conceptualization of scale as enacted and entangled in digital configurations that shape how we live and work. So on that note, Wanda and I would like to thank you for your attention, and we appreciate all the questions that you may have, and we'll do our best to give an answer.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I would like to ask a question that I think a lot of particularly young scholars who are doing their PhD right now would like to ask you, which is that, you know, during lockdown, what kind of encouragement can you give them as practice scholars to, you know, to continue and to be strong in pursuing their studies? These are very challenging times for students that want to be doing practice research. So what can I extrapolate from your provocation that might give them some words of encouragement?
That's a good question. I can say a few words, and then Wanda, I'm sure would like to say a couple of points. Well, I think it has not been an easy time for practice scholars, for some, and in other cases actually has been a pivot and a great opportunity. The ability, again, as we're doing right now, to use digital technologies, in this case Zoom, in ways that we wouldn't have ever used a year ago, perhaps, or not very much. Skype's been around for a long time, but the way in which some have been able to capitalize on new practices of how we complement traditional ways of doing our research through Zoom and through other technologies, and through some of the creative things that we've seen even through this webcast that you've done in how we do our research are very much at play in improvising how we draw on and think of scale in how we then do our research. Wanda, I don't know if you'd like to add.
Sure, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Susan. Just to build on Michael's point, I do think it's exactly right that we are continuing doing research and doing wonderful intellectual conversations, you know, through, you know, as we're doing right now on Zoom at scale. And so I think for us as practice researchers, it's to understand how everyday activity, everyday experiences, everyday work is that the language we're using is entangled with these larger digital configurations that are, you know, worldwide, that are enabling these ways of operating for us as a research community, but of course for all these companies that we would like to study. So it's the practice lens says, look at the everyday work and see how these digital configurations that really enable and of course constrain those kinds of ways of working are enacting a kind of phenomena at scale. And I think the COVID pandemic, you know, Michael's emphasized for this purpose the sort of experience of the actual disease, but we could have done another analysis that looks at how our research and educational practices have been scaled through this really entanglement with these digital configurations. And I think the practice lens allows us to ask, how is every practice kind of entangled with the particular technologies that enable it?
And I just want to add that whilst there are opportunities, there are clear challenges for practice scholars, how to get behind, as it's difficult for us now to get a wider sense of the practice which you would have in a face-to-face setting. So there are consequences and limitations, and so it's not a replacement, but very much how we reshape and add and to a toolbox, maybe also divvy up differently over time as to when we do what types of activities, given our limitations now physically.
Thanks. That's a great point. And I would say, as a practice researcher myself, that one thing this special issue has taught me is that the importance of being creative, and I'd encourage, you know, all researchers to push the boundaries. Right now, we're going through a major transformation at organisation, at firm sectors, and for us to actually embrace, you know, the opportunity, the moment to push boundaries ourselves and practice our scholarship differently, and to claim the voice, you know, claim the moment to be heard. And that is what Bernd Stahl and Lynn Marcus do in their wonderful provocation that is going to be our closing headline showcase for today. And I'd like to ask Bernd to kindly share your screen. And thank you so much, both of you, for this provocation. Let's claim the authority to speak out on the ethics of smart information systems.
Okay, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I would also like to start the presentation by thanking the editors of the special issue. This was an interesting journey, and we hope that our paper here is going to make a bit of a contribution to thinking about theory. The topic we want to talk about, or we talk about in the paper, is ethics, and ethics in particular with regards to smart information systems. So what do we mean by smart information systems? We mean those types of systems that make use of AI, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, and big data. So these are systems that have been touched extensively in various papers of this special issue. And we are in particular interested in questions of ethics around this. Now, it's not very novel to say that computers and information systems have ethical components. The discussion of ethics of computing goes back until the beginning of computing, so to Norbert Wiener, Joe Weizenbaum. So this has been around for decades, but we think that smart information systems, so the novel types of systems that are so pervasive and so impactful, as we've already heard, raise new and additional ethical issues worth considering. And now you're all aware of discussions of biases in data that lead to discrimination, issues around privacy, security, but also broader societal issues around distribution, wealth, employment, political participation, and so on. So these are all considered to some extent ethical issues. And we think that the information systems field, and that's our provocation, could say more to that than it currently does. It could have a stronger voice in this discourse. So at the moment, this discussion is driven by a number of disciplines, all of which contribute their unique knowledge and experience to it. Now, ethics is a concept that comes from philosophy, so it's not surprising that philosophers have a leading voice in talking about ethics of smart information systems. There's also a strong community of legal scholarship or legal scholars who touch on at least components of this. Some aspects of the ethics of smart systems are strongly legally codified. So I'm thinking particularly about data protection, where we have strong regulation, for example, in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. But there are also other aspects related, for example, to liability, where the law has an important voice. Others contributing to this are social scientists from various disciplines, for example, political science. So the ethics of smart systems currently lead to a lot of activities around legislation and regulation. So in Europe, to take this example again, we are expecting a major regulation coming from the European Commission sometime this quarter. So in the next 2 months, something will hit the political discourse in Europe, where the idea is that it's not just about ethics, but also some of those ethical issues will be addressed through legislation. And political scientists and other social scientists contribute to this. Now, finally, there are also the computer scientists, the technical experts who have realized that these are issues that need to be addressed. So there is, for example, the FACT community, so or formerly FAT community. You wouldn't believe it, right? Sorry about that. So there is the FAT community who brings together a lot of technical expertise and who are also looking at how these issues are described and addressed. So our provocation now is that while there are certainly a lot of people in the information systems field that work on this type of problem, at this point there is no coherent voice. I don't believe it. Let me turn this off. The information systems community has to, or would be well advised and has good reason for being more visible in this. Sorry, just noticed that I haven't changed my slide. So why would information systems be in a good position to contribute to this? Well, clearly information systems scholarship brings together a lot of expertise in important aspects of this. It has a range of theoretical backgrounds. It has an understanding of where technology sits in the broader social, but also in particular in the organizational world. There is a strong experience already in working with ethics, but at this point, as far as we think, there is a lack of a coherent approach, which is holding back the information systems community from taking place and contributing to this discourse at the level of detail that would be desired. So with that, I hand over to Lynn for the next step in the provocation.
Thank you, Bernd. Yes, what I'd like to be talking about now is our idea of a solution to the challenge that Bernd just laid out. That is to say, how are we going to claim an authoritative voice? And basically the answer to that is we've developed a framework that we call responsible smart information systems, and we're calling on the field to help us build that framework out. This is a comprehensive framework that is designed to include all the other voices that Bernd was talking about before, but actually to go beyond them to include the kinds of special perspectives and concepts that we bring as information systems scholars. The framework is not organized around specific topics like security and privacy, nor is it organized around specific technologies such as machine learning or social media or so forth. Rather, it's organized around 4 core values. The first of these is compliance, and that might be captioned as follow the rules. And Bernd has already mentioned some of the rules that apply. An example would be institutional review boards for people who do research on human subjects. Another example would be GDPR legislation. But we all know that everything that is legal is not necessarily ethical or societally acceptable. If that, I think that was the whole point of the talk that Amber gave, that there are things that are being done today that are perfectly legal, but that make many of us believe that they are socially unacceptable. And so this notion of acceptability is do no harm as a way of captioning that core value. Third core value is proactivity, which might be captioned as do good. We know now that there are huge movements, for example, data science for good, that people are engaging in to try to make tools like machine learning, like advanced analytics, work for positive social change. And then the final goal here or final core value that we'd like to talk about is reflexivity, which can be shorthanded as know thyself. And here I think we're including such things as where do we in the information systems field stand on issues like surveillance capitalism or the big tech lobby, the role of the Amazons and the Googles and so forth in our world. I'd like to conclude by just restating why we're doing this. we have a really unique and special perspective on technology and society that no other group has. In particular, one of several key points there is our focus on organizations. Other groups that are in this space do not have a concept of organization and they don't use it. I just referred to the FACT community that used to be fairness, accountability, and transparency. I guess it used to be FACT, but now it's FACT, more socially acceptable there. And the recent call for papers does not mention organization at all, except as a potential consumer of the research that we do. And we understand how organizations are important parts of the problem of unethical smart information systems, as well as part of the solution. So we have something unique to say. Other fields aren't saying it. And if we want to get recognized as having an authoritative voice, we can't just approach this in the same way that the other fields are doing. Yes, we have to be aware of what they say, and we also have to include their points of view in our perspectives, but we really have to go well beyond their perspectives in order to inject our own unique perspectives on this debate and be called upon to weigh in on the ethical questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernd and Lynn, for that wonderful exposition on ethics to round up our showcase today. If you have questions for Bernd and Lynn, then please do pop them in the Q&A windows, a moment where you can engage with the scholars. And if you would like to read the full papers and the rest of the provocations, then please go to the website. You'll find the recorded presentations there too. And I'd like to hand over in closing to Andrew for a few words from him. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, thank you to all the authors. Thank you to all the participants. It's really inspiring for us as the editors. It's actually the very last part of our special issue journey. So it's really been a great privilege for us. And I'm extremely happy to be to have the chance to say a few words at the end. Some of the statements I'll make now are the same that I made at the end of the prior sessions, just in case people haven't come. But I wanted to add a few extra comments at this time, given it's the last session. So to begin with, I really wanted to reiterate that developing and debating theory is really the intellectual life of a field. That's what a scholarly life is about. And that's what we were engaged in today. That's what we're engaged in this special issue. And it couldn't be more important. It couldn't be more important to ourselves as scholars to have that vibrant intellectual life. It couldn't be more important to our journals and our field. And frankly, it couldn't be more important to our external stakeholders who depend on the insights that we give them. So as special issue editors, as a member of the field, as editor of MISQ, I want to do all I can, and we want to do all we can to support that intellectual life. It's fundamentally important to the field and to the journal. We saw this special issue as an opportunity to nurture, advance, and celebrate that intellectual life through the theorizing that we produce and debate and develop. Also, we firmly believe that that intellectual life depends on you. It depends on us collectively taking it further. And this is where I wanted to make some extra comments building on some of the words that we used today. So Susan mentioned it in the beginning, curiosity. You can think of theorizing just simply as an expression of human curiosity. It's as simple as that. Humans are innately curious, and theorizing is one way in which we express that curiosity through the theories we develop, the theories we debate, and so on. and we want to nurture that. And how can we nurture it? Well, one way, again, Susan mentioned, is being opening up questions. So, you know, I think as we've had lots of questions and insights in this session today, there were questions in the Q&A and some of the answers might have partially answered things. I think we would want you all to feel empowered to take those questions further and to be the starts of new conversations that can take this further. And I'll do my best as editor, and you know, there's other editors in fact here, to be open as well to your papers when they come in, and to open new questions. So when your paper's published, they open new doors, and then new papers will come after that. Another word that was used today was respect. We want to have respect for the phenomena we study. It's endlessly complex, it's dynamic, it has scale, it's performative, it's generative, it keeps going. And through our respect for that phenomena, we will develop better theories. Also respect for each other, the respect we give each other in the editorial review process, the respect to the institution of science, the respect we have for our stakeholders. That'll help us develop better theories and more useful and practical work. The other aspect, I guess, as a final one, was boldness. One of the participants mentioned be bold in at least a paragraph, and I would encourage you to be bold in the entire paper. And we want those bold papers in MISQ. We want to encourage bold ideas that can shape the future and inspire us. And you know, maybe there's some young participants here who can take the field much further than we could ever dream about. And we hope they've got some good ideas and will send their bold papers to MISQ and the other journals in the field. Look, with that, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all the authors, to the participants, my fellow editors. Susan, thank you for chairing this so wonderfully, and to Brian and his team at Maryland for allowing us to run this workshop. It was a wonderful idea, and I think, you know, at MISQ, I hope we can do this in all our future special issues. I hope maybe it could be a practice that could scale, right, to use the other paper. So thank you all, and I'm just really, really privileged to be part of all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. With sincere thanks to our authors, and a thank you to Brian and the team at the University of Maryland for designing, hosting, and providing technological support for us today, and for all the participants for making time to join us. Thank you so much for being part of the virtual showcase for the MISQ special issue, Next Generation Information Systems Theory. Thank you all.